Okay, let's unpack this. We are standing at a crossroads, what feels like a really fascinating frontier.
It really is. It's this point where two huge fields collide.
Right. On one side, you have the very precise world of computational neuroscience.
The world of circuits and synapses and how neurons fire,
Yeah.
the hard science.
Exactly. And on the other, you've got this vast, sometimes, well, let's be honest, often opaque domain of cognitive
The
psychology.
world of the mind.
Yes. And this deep dive is really about moving computational science beyond just simulating the brain's physical structure, that beautiful, complex circuitry that we know dictates how the neurons fire, and moving towards actually trying to simulate thought itself.
And that distinction is absolutely everything. We're talking about building systems, truly adaptive, intelligent systems that don't just mimic the biological hardware.
The wetware.
Flatware, right. But systems that can actually grasp the higher level functions, things like strategy, reflection, and this is the crucial part, the capacity for learning how to learn.
So our mission today is to really get into a foundational research initiative that is designed to do exactly that. We're diving into the blueprint of a project led by a researcher, Dr. Samuel Nemotin.
In this plan, it aims to fuse these high-level psychological constructs, everything we call the mind, directly into the framework of these very detailed, multi-scale neural simulations.
Our goal here is to really pull out the key insights. We want to see how this kind of hybrid architecture could it revolutionize both neurotechnology and AI?
I think what's so fascinating here, what really stands out, is the deliberate, explicit attempt to integrate these high-level psychological factors.
Things we talk about all the time but can't really pin down.
Exactly, things we intuitively call intelligence or strategic intent. And the goal is to plug them directly into the fine-grained machinery of spiking neural networks. It's about bridging that gap between the biophysical reality of an individual synapse firing and the complex, goal-oriented constructs of the conscious mind.
The ambition of a project like this, it necessitates a leader with an equally ambitious and, frankly, a very broad background. Before we get into the nitty-gritty of the science, we have to talk about the person behind it.
We really do. The success of this kind of work hinges completely on the background of the lead researcher, Dr. Nemotin. This isn't just a neuroscientist, and it's certainly not just a computer scientist.
It's a true blend of the two fields.
It has to be. That blend is the core prerequisite for this research. If you look at Dr. Nemotin's biography, it highlights this exact necessary interdisciplinary path. He has a B.S. magna cum laude and then an M.S. in computer science from Queens College in Columbia.
Okay, so that's the foundation. The coding rigor, the deep expertise in algorithms, the command over the computational architectures you would need to even start tackling simulations this complex.
That's all there. He's got the hardware and software expertise squared away. But then he layered on top of that a PhD in biomedical engineering from SUI Downstate and NYU Poly.
And that's the leap. That's the leap into the biology.
Absolutely. That biomedical engineering specialization that provides the deep expertise in biological modeling, understanding the actual physics and the dynamics of a neuronal membrane, the fluid interactions, all the precise neuroanatomy that defines how these things function.
In his current appointments, they really reflect this integration, don't they?
They do. He's a research scientist V, which is a tenured position, at the Nathan S. Klein Institute for Psychiatric Research. He's specializing in psychiatric research models there. And he's also a research associate professor at NYU Grossman School of Medicine.
It's just so clear that his entire career has been focused on this one thing, applying rigorous computation to really difficult biological questions.
And it's not just in one place. We see this history of high-level engagement with all these diverse research groups. He had prior roles as a research biomedical engineer and a senior fellow at the U.S. Army Research Laboratory, plus time spent at incredible institutions like Brown and Yale. This kind of robust background is absolutely essential for handling the complexity of multi-scale modeling. You have to remember, this involves integrating data from the molecular level all the way up to full functioning system dynamics.
And it's clear this isn't some niche project. The work is being recognized as a high-value, high-impact effort.
Oh, for sure. It's supported by substantial funding. We're talking large NIH grants from NIDCD, NIMH, that are focusing on the fundamental mechanisms of things like auditory circuits and selective attention.
And the funding from the Army Research Lab, that's crucial too. It underlines the potential applications here, not just for medicine, but for national security and technology in building these intelligent, adaptive models.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's talk about the launch pad for this new cognitive initiative. The current mission of integrating the mind into the machine, it isn't starting from a blank slate, is it?
Not at all. It's built on a massive, really successful prior project. This was documented in a 2023 Cell Reports article.
What was it?
It was a data-driven, multi-scale model of macaque auditory thalamocortical circuits.
That foundational work seems like critical context for what comes next.
It is. That macaque model was incredibly detailed. They were leveraging these really established platforms like Neuron and NetPine, which are, the industry standards for high-fidelity neural simulation.
So they weren't just modeling generic, off-the-shelf neurons.
No, no. They incorporated high-fidelity neuroanatomical data. They made sure the neurons were morphologically accurate, that they had the right shapes and branches, and they included realistic synaptic interactions across the macaque auditory circuits.
Now, for you, our listener, why is this specific circuit, the macaque auditory thalamocortical circuit, so important? I mean, this isn't just a random piece of neural tissue they picked, right?
Not at all. This circuit is the critical relay for complex auditory processing. It's deeply involved in selective attention, the classic cocktail party problem. Your ability to focus on a single voice in a really noisy room.
So it's integral to how the brain processes sound, how it filters out noise, and how it establishes this sort of oscillatory communication between the thalamus and the cortex.
Exactly. And the key achievement of that model was its ability to reproduce in vivo dynamics.
So what it looks like in a living animal.
Precisely. It could reproduce both spontaneous background activity, the brain's natural hum, and the activity driven by specific stimuli, like hearing a particular sound.
So in essence, they built a physically realistic digital circuit of a really sophisticated biological system. You could actually run experiments on it that would mirror real-world neurophysiology with a high degree of fidelity.
Exactly. It proved that the biological mechanisms were correctly represented, and it bridged that gap between detailed biological realism and functional systems neuroscience. You could test hypotheses about auditory signal processing or the role of inhibitory neurons in filtering noise.
And I feel a big but coming.
But, and this is the key limitation, the one that catalyzed this whole new research program, this model was grounded entirely in physiological principles.
Meaning, it could tell you how a specific pattern of spikes resulted from a specific sound coming in, but it couldn't tell you why the simulated macaque chose to focus on that sound in the first place.
That's it.
It had no strategy. It couldn't decide to ignore the noise. It was a perfect physical simulator, but it lacked that psychological layer of choice, of motivation, of strategic intelligence.
That is the tension right there. It lacked any mechanisms for cognitive strategy or learning style or motivation baked into the simulation. And the absence of these high-level psychological dimensions in what was otherwise a highly realistic biophysical model is precisely the launchpad for this new initiative.
So the profound question they're now asking is, can we use these cognitive constructs to elevate the fidelity and the predictive capacity of these neural simulations? Can we turn a detailed machine into, well, a thinking agent?
That's the billion-dollar question.
Okay, so to really understand why this shift from pure physiology to integrated strategy is so critical, we need to look at an earlier, very informative piece of research from the team.
Yes, this paper explored different ways to train spiking neural networks, or SNNs, for a simple control task. And the results from this provide the direct quantitative motivation for this whole cognitive integration hypothesis.
The context here is vital, right? Because SNNs, which process information in the time domain using discrete events, spikes, just like our brains do.
They're often seen as the future of biologically inspired AI. But there's a problem.
They've historically underperformed.
Massively underperformed against traditional non-spiking artificial neural networks, ANNs, in pretty standard control tasks. So the goal of this research was to push SNN performance forward, but using biologically plausible mechanisms.
And the test they used was the classic cart-pole reinforcement learning control problem.
A rite of passage for any learning algorithm.
Right. It's simple. You have a pole attached to a cart. You have to balance it for as long as possible by just pushing the cart left or right. It's a foundational test. And they tested two fundamentally different approaches to learning this. Let's start with the one that seems most biologically accurate on the surface, STDP-RL.
STDPRL. It stands for Spike Timing Dependent Reinforcement Learning. And it's really the gold standard for established individual-level training mechanisms in computational neuroscience.
So it takes the standard STDP rule.
Right, where the relative timing of the pre- and postsynaptic spikes determines whether a synapse gets stronger or weaker.
And it adds a reward signal on top of that.
It modulates that whole process with a reward signal, exactly.
Okay, walk us through the mechanics of that modulation. How did the network actually know if it was doing a good job?
So in this STDP-RL setup, the reinforcement signal, which they call the critic, is handcrafted, and it's delivered frequently. We're talking on the time scale of individual moves every 50 milliseconds.
Wow, that's constant feedback.
It's extremely high-frequency feedback. It provides immediate reward or punishment based on very small changes in the game state. Specifically, the critic would evaluate how close the pole was to being perfectly balanced. It did this by using the absolute values of the angle and the angular velocity.
So if the network's action made things better, moved it closer to balance, it got a reward.
A little reward. And if the action increased the tilt, it got a little punishment.
So this is high-frequency, very explicit feedback aimed at local synaptic weights, and it's driven by the immediate outcome. It's learning by immediate trial and error delivered right at the synapse. So what were the results?
The findings were illuminating, but ultimately they were pretty damning for this purely localized approach.
How so?
Well, compared to a network that was just making random choices, STDP-RL improved performance significantly. The baseline random performance was a median of only 19 steps per episode before the pole fell.
Which is not great.
Terrible. For the best performing model, STDP-RL jumped that median all the way up to 130 steps per episode. That's a massive gain, and it proves the mechanism fundamentally works.
But here comes the other shoe. The maximum score on the cart pole game is 500 steps. 130 steps is still, well, it's suboptimal. It's leaving a huge amount of potential performance just untapped.
Exactly, and here's the critical failing. The performance was incredibly sensitive to the initial network connectivity, the random seed they used to start the network.
So depending on how the network was wired at the very beginning, by chance, it could do well or poorly.
Dramatically so. The worst performing Cs only reached a median of 53 steps. This result shows that even though the plasticity rule, STDP-RL, was biologically plausible and fundamentally sound, its ability to find an optimal solution was severely constrained by these initial random structural limitations.
It suggests that if the initial wiring wasn't accidentally, conducive to the task, the localized learning mechanism just couldn't overcome it. It got stuck.
You got stuck in a local minimum. And when they analyzed what the SNN was actually learning under STDP-RL, they found something really interesting.
What was that?
They found that the network developed associations that primarily focused on only one of the four sensory inputs.
Only one. Which one?
Angular velocity, basically, how fast the pole was tipping. The network really struggled to integrate the full context, the cart's position, its velocity, the pole's angle, and its angular velocity. It couldn't put it all together when it was relying on that explicit short interval critic.
The training was too localized. It led to a narrow, sort of one-trick pony solution instead of a robust, holistic sensorimotor map.
Precisely.
Okay, now let's pivot to the second approach they tried. Evolutionary strategies, or EVOL. This sounds like an entirely different philosophical approach to learning.
It is. It's a completely different level of abstraction. EVOL is a population-level learning method. It ignores that immediate local feedback loop entirely.
So no more 50-millisecond rewards.
None. Instead of tweaking individual synaptic weights based on immediate moves, it treats the entire set of synaptic weights, the whole architecture of the network, as a single genome.
A genome. Okay, and then what happens?
Then you generate offspring populations of networks by slightly perturbing or mutating this genome, and the fitness is determined not by the immediate movement, but by the overall episodic performance, the total game score.
So it's a much, much sparser feedback signal.
Way sparser. If a network perturbation performs well over an entire game episode, that genome is favored. The best performing weights are combined to yield the next generation. The weights are only updated between game iterations, not during the interaction with the environment.
So this is a system-level strategic optimization. You're essentially running many slightly mutated versions of the brain model to see which overall architecture performs best. This is more analogous to biological evolution, or
Correct.
maybe like a strategic manager optimizing their entire team's structure based on quarterly results, rather than telling individual workers what to do every 5 minutes.
That analogy is perfect. It's exactly that, and the results were overwhelmingly in favor of this global strategic approach.
How much better?
Evol achieved robust and optimal performance. It reached a median of 500 steps per episode, the maximum possible score.
The max.
And it learned the task much faster. While STD-PRL averaged around 4,000 episodes to reach its suboptimal plateau, Evol reached optimal performance around 7,000 episodes, but it was achieving the maximum score consistently, which STD-PRL never managed to do, not once.
Okay, that is the key finding, isn't it? Suboptimal, fragile performance driven by immediate local biological learning versus robust, optimal performance driven by system-level strategic optimization. But here's the friction I want to introduce.
Go for it.
Isn't relying on a global optimization like Evol, isn't that kind of cheating? If the goal is to understand biological learning, doesn't STD-PRL, for all its failings, tell us more about the real brain?
That is the critical question, and it addresses the very core of this new research we're discussing. While you're right, Evol is not biologically plausible as an individual learning mechanism. You don't run 1,000 versions of yourself every day to update your synapses.
Right.
Its success provides a philosophical necessity. It proves that to get high performance in a complex environment, you need robust, system-level strategies that can integrate information holistically and overcome those local constraints.
And the analysis showed that's what Evol did.
It did. The analysis showed the Evol models learned broader associations using both the angle and the angular velocity, unlike the very localized STD-PRL.
So the key insight here is that the strategy layer, the system-level goal and optimization, is a prerequisite for achieving high performance. If the physiological learning rule, STD-PRL, fails to find a good global solution, you need something higher level. You need a mind component to structure the learning process and guide the network toward the optimal strategic solution.
Precisely. The success of Evol, an algorithm that optimizes for overall strategic fitness, is what directly motivates the central research hypothesis. That embedding these high-level cognitive constructs is necessary not just for better AI, but to elevate our biologically grounded simulations to optimal performance and, ultimately, to true biological realism.
This brings us directly to the new research initiative, the one laid out in the Integrating Cognitive Psychology with Multiscale Neural Models document. Having established that this system-level optimization is necessary, the next logical step isn't to search for a better algorithm, it's to start designing the cognitive layer itself.
Exactly. And the main hypothesis driving this work is profound. It's that the quality and the efficiency of biophysically grounded neural learning can be dramatically enhanced by explicitly integrating cognitive constructs. Things like strategic adaptation, behavioral flexibility, motivation, and intelligence, integrating them directly into the simulation frameworks.
So instead of just hoping that the synaptic changes accidentally stumble upon a good strategy, the idea is to explicitly define the psychological factors, like, say, the desire to succeed or the capacity to switch tactics, and inject them into the biophysical simulation to proactively guide the learning process.
That is the fundamental shift. They are moving beyond purely neuron-level adaptation, which focuses solely on synaptic change, to create systems capable of reflective, goal-driven learning. Much like the higher-level strategies employed by humans and other advanced animals, this is where the simulation becomes truly mind-aware.
To achieve a fusion like that, what's the very first necessary step on their agenda?
The research plan outlines 3 key aims, and the first one is foundational. They need to investigate how varying levels of intelligence influence learning trajectories, both in real and in simulated animals.
So you have to be able to quantify intelligence first.
You do. This requires establishing a quantifiable cognitive gradient, so you can actually define low intelligence versus high intelligence, and then translate those differences into modeling parameters.
And the second aim seems to tackle that difficult problem of computational mapping. I mean, how do you turn an abstract concept like intelligence into a line of code?
Well, the second aim is to identify the neural correlates of intelligent behavior and then develop computational analogs for those correlates.
So finding out what intelligence actually looks like inside the circuit, is it, I don't know, increased stability of certain oscillations, faster communication between layers? Something else.
All of the above, potentially. And then you have to build a software module to represent that property in the simulation. They need to define intelligence as a mathematically actionable state.
And finally, the third aim brings it all together.
It does, creating hybrid brain models that fuse that high-fidelity biophysical learning, the STDP-RL mechanisms, with these new high-level behavioral strategy modules.
And they have a massive head start on this because they already have the perfect base model, that macaque thalamocortical auditory model we talked about.
Exactly. The proposed extension is to take that existing, highly detailed physiological model and embed these psychological modifiers directly into it.
That auditory model, the one that was purely physiological before, what kind of specific psychological modifiers are they planning to embed into a system that was designed for sound processing?
The core modifiers include things like learning flexibility, attentional modulation, and internal goal representation.
Okay, give me an example.
All right, so consider the macaque's auditory cortex trying to filter out distracting noise. The purely physiological model can filter noise based on signal strength. The hybrid model adds the psychological layer. The cognitive module would feed inputs back into the network to simulate, say, high attention or a clear goal representation.
And that would change the physiology.
It would alter the physiological learning dynamics in a non-standard strategic way. For instance, it might temporarily increase the strength of specific excitatory pathways that are linked to the target sound, based entirely on the agent's intention.
So the intention itself, a cognitive construct, becomes a regulator of the biological plasticity rules. This moves the simulation firmly into the territory of cognitive systems, and it allows them to test, really for the first time, whether we can mathematically represent the subjective experience of motivation and attention in a high-fidelity neurobiological circuit.
That's the holy grail right there.
Okay, here's where we get granular. We've established the big hypothesis. Now let's look at the specific biologically plausible tracks they plan to run. These 4 areas are grounded in established findings in systems neuroscience and psychology, but they integrate this new cognitive layer.
The first track focuses intensely on cognitive behavioral modulation of plasticity. This is the practical step. It's about enriching existing physiological plasticity rules like STDP by making them explicitly context-sensitive. It's acknowledging that a synapse changes differently when you are focused versus when you are distracted.
Context sensitivity.
Mhm.
So the learning rules aren't static. What are some specific examples of these contextual tags they plan to introduce?
They plan to introduce tags that can modulate STDP based on things like reward proximity, so how close the agent is to its goal, or something like novelty detection. If the agent encounters a completely new stimulus, the learning rate might spike immediately.
Like when you're surprised and your attention just snaps to something new?
Exactly. They also plan to adjust learning rates based on dynamic behavioral metrics, things like reaction time, gaze fixation, or a measured motivation level. For example, if the simulated agent is highly motivated, maybe you're running a simulation where an internal variable representing dopamine release is high. The simulation might temporarily increase the overall learning rate across the entire system.
Enabling this rapid, concentrated adaptation. It's like biological focus.
It is, and that immediately addresses the limitation of STDPRL we saw earlier. Instead of a uniform plotting learning rate, the network can strategically decide when to learn fast and what to focus on.
Okay, so the second track moves this concept out into the diversity of life itself, cross-species comparative modeling.
This is a major undertaking. It aims to model intelligence along a quantifiable cognitive gradient across different species: rodents, marmosets, macaques, and eventually humans.
How on earth do you translate something so abstract and qualitative like intelligence or species complexity into concrete simulation parameters that a computer can actually process?
It's a huge challenge. It requires translating these high-level, observable, species-specific factors, like the complexity of their social hierarchy, or their demonstrated ability for tool use, or their documented cognitive flexibility into strategic learning constraints.
So a rodent model, for example.
A rodent model might have strict limitations on the number of sensory inputs it can simultaneously integrate into a strategy, whereas a simulated human brain model would have a much, much higher capacity for strategic planning or task switching.
And this isn't just guesswork.
No, the models will be calibrated using real comparative cognition behavioral datasets. This is to define species-specific cognitive flexibility thresholds, ensuring the simulated intelligence level is grounded in comparative zoological data, not just some arbitrary numbers they've picked.
That grounds the simulation's intelligence not just in physiology, but in evolution. Okay, The third track moves this strategic agent into a challenging environment, neuroethological simulation protocols.
This involves designing ecologically valid task environments to analyze the emergent dynamics under conditions that genuinely challenge the agent's cognition. They are moving far beyond the simple cart pull to tackle complex, realistic behavioral challenges.
Tell us about the specific tasks. What are we talking about here?
They're planning to build virtual foraging environments, navigation tasks that require planning around dynamic obstacles, and even complex cooperative problem-solving scenarios.
And the crucial element here isn't just seeing if they can do the task.
No, it's simulating behavioral state transitions under challenging conditions, things like stress, fatigue, or abrupt shifts in reward availability. The analysis will specifically look for the neural switch from a reactive mode
The instinctual, localized response, like the STD-PRL behavior.
to a strategic mode. The goal-driven integrated response, like the EVL behavior. This is where the hybrid model proves its worth by showing how cognitive load actually affects core physiological function.
This mirrors that real-world experience of suddenly needing to think on your feet when a simple task becomes complicated. Okay, the fourth grounded track is deeply technical. It focuses on how internal goals interact with the brain's electrical rhythm. Feedback-driven, oscillatory pattern modeling.
This is critical for understanding attention. It's about modeling how internal goals don't just passively result from neural rhythms, but how they actively influence them. They're creating bidirectional feedback loops between the simulated decision layers, the cognitive input, the cortical oscillatory systems, which is the physiological mechanism.
Okay, hold on. How does this feedback loop actually work physically in the model?
They are specifically investigating something called phase amplitude coupling, or PAC.
Break that down for us.
Okay, so for you, the listener, PAC is a fundamental concept. It's where the phase, which is the timing of a slow oscillatory brainwave, maybe in the theta frequency range, which is associated with memory and navigation. That phase controls the amplitude, the power or intensity of a faster wave, like gamma, which is associated with information processing. This mechanism is theorized to be how the brain carries attentional or contextual commands across different brain regions.
So the cognitive module can essentially say, this information over here is important, and that goal translates into a specific theta phase alignment, which then boosts the processing power, the gamma amplitude, in the relevant circuit.
You've got it. Exactly. They'll be able to examine how different intelligence levels stabilize or destabilize this oscillatory coherence. And they can use PAC as the physical substrate for attentional modulation within their circuits. This ties high-level attention and goal-seeking directly into measurable micro-level neural activity patterns. It provides a testable link between strategy and circuit physics.
We've covered the grounded research, the tracks that build directly on known neurobiology. But this research agenda also contains some really high-risk, high-reward concepts, ideas that take a deliberate leap beyond current systems neuroscience and delve into synthetic cognition. This is where we get to ask the biggest what-if questions.
This raises a really important question. What principles govern synthetic cognition when we're no longer strictly limited by known biological constraints? The first speculative track addresses intelligence-driven plasticity priors.
Priors. We use priors constantly in our own lives, right? Our background knowledge and expectations structure how we interpret new information. When you learn to drive a new car, you don't start from scratch. You apply the prior knowledge of car. How do they plan to simulate this in a network that's learning a new task?
The plan is to incorporate these generalized priors that represent a kind of inherent intelligence into the synaptic plasticity thresholds themselves. This involves simulating Bayesian belief updates to modulate attention and learning rate.
So if the system has a high intelligence prior,
It assumes the world is structured and predictable. The core idea is modeling how intelligent agents leverage expectations, their prior belief system, to drastically reduce the learning cost. If the system expects a certain outcome based on past analogous experience, it doesn't need nearly as many costly trial and error iterations as a blank slate would.
this moves the network from merely learning a set of inputs and outputs to learning what type of rule to apply based on the context. That's the classic definition of meta-learning. And that leads directly to the second speculative track, synthetic metacognition layers.
This is truly pushing the frontier of autonomy. They aim to build reflective agents that are capable of actively adjusting their own learning strategy in real time.
So imagine a simulated system running STD-PRL, realizing after 100 episodes that it's stuck at 130 steps. and then internally deciding to change its priority.
Exactly. Perhaps it decides to prioritize the angle input over the angular velocity input, or it decides to reduce its learning rate to explore more broadly.
But how would the network know when to change strategy? What mechanism drives that internal choice?
It would be implemented by layers that actively estimate things like model uncertainty or performance decay. If the model realizes its performance has plateaued and its uncertainty about the environment is stable, that could trigger an internal simulated reward signal specifically for error correction or strategic discovery,
They actually refer to simulating strategic boredom or novelty seeking.
which is a fantastic concept. The agent receives an internal positive reward simply for abandoning an inefficient path and exploring a novel strategy. This kind of self-directed optimization is the ultimate reflection of learning how to learn.
Strategic boredom. I love that. Okay, the third speculative track, biodigital feedback loops, takes advantage of our current massive advancements in AI.
This is the fusion of these biologically detailed models and current machine learning technology. They propose pairing their spiking brain simulations with large language model or LLM-guided feedback systems.
In the hypothesis.
The hypothesis is to test whether external digital context provided by an LLM, which excels at generating complex, abstract concepts and high-level reasoning, can enhance the biological learning efficiency within the spiking network.
So the LLM wouldn't be part of the spiking network itself. It would be more like an observer, a super tutor for the simulated brain, guiding its strategy.
Exactly. For example, if the simulated agent fails a complex navigation task, the LLM might process that failure and translate it into a strategic instruction for the spiking network. Something like, your path optimization failed because you prioritize speed over energy conservation. Reframe the goal as resource efficiency.
And this abstract feedback then guides the cognitive module, which in turn modulates the physiological plasticity. That is a powerful idea for accelerating complex biological modeling. Moving to the social realm, the fourth track introduces simulated theory of mind modules.
Theory of mind. In humans, that's the ability to attribute mental states, beliefs, intentions, desires to other people. It's absolutely vital for cooperation. They plan to design simulations where multiple agents observe each other to try and infer hidden goals.
This moves way beyond simple reactive cooperation, like one agent just moving out of the way of another.
Okay.
This is true team cognition.
It is. They aim to model complex cooperative learning and imitation based on learned shared intention states and neural synchrony. If one robot sees another robot fail to achieve a goal, and it can infer that robot's intention, it learns not just from the observed error, but from the inferred mismatch between the intention and the outcome of the other agent. This forms the basis for complex, flexible teams.
And finally, the fifth track is truly long-range. It's almost theoretical.
Yeah.
Sci-fi tier, quantum learning indices.
This is pure ambitious speculation. It's considering theoretical mechanisms for massive, rapid encoding that far surpass classical computation limits. They're exploring how non-classical phenomena might contribute to efficiency gains.
What specifically are they even simulating here?
They're looking at simulating theoretical quantum biasing of memory encoding thresholds, possibly through things like distributed coherence or entanglement-like states in these artificial systems. The idea isn't to build a quantum computer.
All right.
It's to model how the concepts of instantaneous coherence or entanglement might hypothetically inform massive efficiency gains in artificial intelligence memory and learning. It ensures the project maintains a vision that's always pushing the physical and computational boundaries of what synthetic intelligence can achieve.
All these research tracks, from the grounded to the speculative, require a massive technical undertaking. This project is significantly increasing the computational complexity of existing models. What platforms and methodological solutions are the researchers using to manage this monumental task?
The foundational platform remains the same, that established neuron and NetPine modeling ecosystem. That ensures the biophysical fidelity is maintained. However, managing the integration of all these psychological variables demands really advanced technical solutions. They're developing Python-based wrappers specifically to seamlessly interface the cognitive state estimators, that's the psychological input layer we discussed, with the network dynamics, which is the biophysical output layer.
So integrating a high-level goal-setting Python layer with the detailed spike-by-spike biophysics of neuron, that must be a monumental computational and software engineering challenge. How do they manage the timing synchronization?
That's the core technical hurdle. You need microsecond synchronization between a high-level strategic decision made in the Python wrapper and the immediate effect it has on synaptic firing rules happening inside the neuron environment. The complexity increases significantly with these integrated cognitive loads. It means the entire system requires high-performance computing, HPC, and massive GPU scaling just to run the simulations efficiently and extract meaningful, statistically robust data.
All right, let's shift to the anticipated applications. The ultimate
Mhm.
goal here is to build brain-inspired systems that not only learn, but learn intelligently and strategically. What are the real-world payoffs in neurotechnology?
There are three major immediate applications in neurotechnology, starting with adaptive brain-computer interfaces, or BCIs.
Mm.
Current BCIs decode intentions, but they often struggle when the user's focus drifts.
Because the human brain is never truly static.
Mhm.
Our cognitive state, our confidence, our attention, it fluctuates constantly.
Exactly. This research will enable BCIs that dynamically adapt their decoding strategies based on the user's current cognitive state, things like attention level, emotional stress, confidence, or goal clarity. All of that could be measured via external sensors or internal modeling.
And you can imagine if you're controlling a robotic arm with a BCI, that kind of adaptability is everything.
It is. If the system recognizes the user is suddenly distracted or uncertain, it can adjust its reading sensitivity. Maybe it switches to a more generalized decoding algorithm. This would lead to much more reliable and robust neuroprosthetics in real-world, high-stakes environments.
Next, they mention cognitive load-aware hearing aids. That addresses a major issue with current assistive listening devices.
It tackles auditory fatigue, and that is a huge real-world problem for hearing aid users in noisy environments. These new systems would use attention and cognitive state estimates derived from either the user's modeled brain state or embedded biometric sensors to dynamically shape auditory filtering and adjust gain strategies.
So if the device knows you're highly focused on a specific speaker,
It optimizes filtering for that source, reducing all the acoustic clutter and cutting down on the monumental cognitive effort that's needed to parse the soundscape. It turns sound processing from a brute force filter into an intelligently guided attention system.
and finally, neuroadaptive stimulation systems like transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, or deep brain stimulation, DBS.
This moves stimulation into a truly closed-loop, personalized system. Instead of applying static, time-based stimulation protocols, they can tailor TMS or DBS protocols to dynamically match the brain's cognitive flaws. The stimulation is grounded in real-time behavioral states.
Give me an example.
Okay, in Parkinson's treatment, the system could monitor the brain's internal decision-making phase and deliver stimulation precisely when the motor planning circuits are active. This would maximize therapeutic efficacy and minimize energy waste or side effects from unnecessary stimulation.
Beyond medical technology, the research is clearly aimed at revolutionizing autonomous systems, specifically humanoid robotics applications.
This is where we see the synthetic cognition truly blossom. The first application is emotionally sensitive auditory agents. This goes way beyond simple reactive programming.
How so?
These robots would use modeled curiosity and relevance, high-level cognitive constructs to prioritize sensory input and employ relevance-based perceptual strategies. A search and rescue robot wouldn't just hear all noises, it would listen for anomalies that are relevant to its current goal state, prioritizing certain frequencies based on its simulated motivation level.
And building directly on that concept of metacognition we explored earlier, we have meta-learning robotic systems.
These are the robots that would truly embody the core goal of the project. They would be capable of adjusting their own fundamental core learning algorithms in real time.
Just like that speculative research track.
Exactly. If a robot finds its current path optimization strategy is inefficient for a novel terrain, it simulates that strategic boredom we talked about, it switches its internal learning rate, and it explores a completely new learning model dynamically. This is the ultimate reflection of flexible, human-like intelligence.
And finally, the vision for cooperative dual-agent frameworks, which would utilize that simulated theory of mind.
This aims to develop teams of robots that can share task representation and implement true team cognition via simulated shared intention states and neural synchrony. The robots would work together not just by following predefined scripts, but by inferring and aligning their internal goals.
Which would lead to complex and flexible collaboration in dynamic, real-world environments.
It's like a coordinated medical team where the agents anticipate each other's needs based on inferred intentions.
So what does this all mean? We started with the foundational work of Dr. Nemotin, realizing that while these highly detailed biophysical models can replicate how the brain fires, they fall short of capturing why the mind chooses a specific strategy.
And that comparison between the limited, biologically plausible, local learning of STD-PRL and the robust system-level strategic optimization of evil, it confirmed that high performance requires a holistic cognitive approach.
This research initiative is really about creating a hybrid architecture that merges physiology with psychology.
It is. It acknowledges that intelligence emerges not just from synaptic connections, but from the dynamic interaction of perception, goal-driven context, motivation, and strategic application. By integrating these high-level cognitive attributes like intelligence and strategic behavior onto existing multi-scale neural models, we can emulate not just the brain's physical structure, but its capacity for flexible, goal-directed learning and reflection.
Ultimately, this work bridges computational models of the brain with the cognitive architectures of the mind, and it supports neurotechnologies that dynamically adapt to the user's shifting state and autonomous agents that can emulate human-like reasoning and flexibility.
It's the definitive step toward building machines that are not only brain-inspired, but truly mind-aware systems that understand the necessity of strategy.
The central question driving all of this research, then, is whether we can build systems that not only learn, but fundamentally learn how to learn. Systems that can reflect, reframe, and evolve in ways that mirror biological intelligence.
And just consider how much faster and more efficient our own learning becomes when we move from simple trial and error to applying conscious strategy, leveraging expectations and past successes. What capabilities will synthetic intelligence unlock once it becomes truly self-aware of its learning process, moving entirely from brute force computation to strategic cognitive elegance?